starting with number 1 Brewster F-2A Buffalo, United States, 1938. The Buffalo was the U.S. Navy's first monoplane fighter, and by the time it faced combat, it was a demonstrably dangerous aircraft to operate. Overweight, underpowered, and plagued by hydraulic failures and oil system problems, it was outclassed in every Pacific engagement it entered. At the Battle of Midway in June 1942, of 20 Buffaloes that engaged Japanese forces, 13 were shot down and 3 more were damaged beyond repair, a loss rate exceeding 80% in a single engagement. Pilots hated it because it was visibly inferior to its opponents. Its systems failed without warning, and there was no margin for error in a cockpit that offered neither protection nor performance. Surviving pilots after action reports described it as flatly unfit for combat against modern opposition. 2. Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver, United States, 1942. The Helldiver required over 880 engineering changes before reaching production standard, a figure that itself documents how far the original design was from being ready. Early variants suffered structural weakness in the rear fuselage, instability in dives, and chronic engine and hydraulic problems that killed crews in training before the aircraft ever reached combat. U.S. Navy pilots gave it the unofficial name the Beast, and not as a compliment. Numerous crews were lost to non-combat accidents during the early operational period, and squadron commanders formally petitioned to retain the older Dauntless rather than accept an aircraft they did not trust to bring them home. 3. Hawker Typhoon, United Kingdom, 1941. The Typhoon killed approximately 30 of its own pilots in the first year of operations through 2 distinct and documented failures. Rear fuselage joint failures caused tail sections to separate without warning in flight. Pilots simply ceased to exist as functioning aircraft became uncontrolled wreckage. Simultaneously, carbon monoxide from the Napier Sabre engine's exhaust system leaked into cockpits, silently incapacitating pilots before they could identify the source. Pilots hated it because they could not see either threat coming. There was no enemy to evade, no warning to act upon, only the knowledge that the aircraft itself might kill them before the mission began. 4. Blackburn Botha, United Kingdom, 1939. The Botha killed more of its own air crew in training than it ever threatened an enemy. Powered by 2 Bristol Perseus engines that were fundamentally insufficient for the aircraft's loaded weight, it could not maintain altitude on a single engine, a non-negotiable requirement for any aircraft operating over open water. RAF records indicate that fatal accidents in the Botha during its training role consistently outpaced any operational utility the type provided. Crews hated it because its fundamental flaw, inadequate power, was not a manageable limitation. It was a structural condition of the aircraft that no technique or experience could overcome, and it killed without providing any meaningful return. 5. Miles Master MKI, United Kingdom, 1939. The Miles Master MKI killed student pilots through spin characteristics that gave minimally experienced aviators no recoverable warning. The torque of the Rolls-Royce Kestrel engine on takeoff and the aircraft behavior in certain stall configurations produced departure from controlled flight that inexperienced hands could not reverse. RAF training command records from 1940 to 1941 document fatal spin accidents in the type at a rate that prompted Air Ministry concern. Pilots hated it specifically because it was a trainer, an aircraft they were placed in before they had the experience to survive its more dangerous characteristics. It demanded skills it was supposed to be teaching. 6. Avro Manchester, United Kingdom, 1940. The Manchester killed 78 aircraft worth of crews, a significant portion of those losses attributable to the Rolls-Royce Vulture engine rather than to German defenses. The Vulture failed catastrophically and without reliable warning on takeoff over the North Sea and over occupied Europe. Crews hated the Manchester because the threat was beneath them, inside their own aircraft, on every sortie. They could navigate perfectly, evade fighters competently, and still lose the aircraft to an engine that was documented as unreliable before the first operational mission was ever flown. The decision to deploy it regardless was made by people who did not fly it. 7. Supermarine Type 224, United Kingdom, 1934. The Type 224 killed no pilots directly, Its evaluation period was brief and its rejection swift. But it belongs in this account because it represents what happens when institutional specification constrains engineering to the point of producing something fundamentally unworkable. Pilots who evaluated it found an aircraft inferior to biplanes already in service, with an evaporative cooling system requiring external condensers along the wings and a fixed undercarriage that added drag without simplifying operation. Their documented assessments were unambiguous. The Type 224 is the aircraft Reginald Mitchell was forced to build before he was allowed to build the Spitfire. 8. Breda Ba.88 Linz, Italy, 1936. The Ba.88 killed at least 9 of its own crews through takeoff accidents and engine failures rooted in a power-to-weight deficiency so severe that the aircraft could barely leave the ground under combat load. Italian pilots hated it because the performance gap between its world record demonstrations, flown clean, with minimal fuel, and its operational reality was total. The aircraft that set speed records in 1937 was a different machine from the one that stalled on takeoff in Libya in 1940. Several Ba.88s were abandoned on Libyan airfields intact and used as static decoys, a more useful purpose than anything they achieved in flight. 10. Ferry Battle, United Kingdom, 1937. The ferry battle killed over 200 aircraft worth of crews between September 1939 and June 1940, with loss rates that rendered entire squadrons non-operational within weeks of entering combat. On May 12, 1940, 5 battle crews flew against the Maastricht bridges. All 5 aircraft were lost. Both Victoria Crosses awarded that day were posthumous. Pilots hated the battle because they knew, before takeoff, based on documented pre-war assessments, that it was inadequate. The Air Ministry knew. Squadron commanders knew. The crews knew. They flew it anyway because there was nothing else available. And the knowledge that their aircraft was a guaranteed casualty was carried into every mission they were ordered to fly. 11. Bolton Paul Defiant, United Kingdom, 1939. The Defiant lost 37 aircraft in daytime combat during the Battle of Britain, with No. 141 Squadron losing 6 of 9 aircraft in a single engagement on July 19, 1940. Pilots hated it because its fundamental tactical concept, a turret fighter with no forward armament, was defeated within days of entering combat, and the aircraft continued to be sent into the same conditions regardless. Every pilot in a Defiant cockpit understood that a German fighter approaching from ahead or below could not be engaged, could not be evaded at the Defiant's performance level, and would almost certainly kill them. The aircraft's design made that outcome not a risk, but a near certainty against a competent opponent. 12. Heinkel He-177 Greif, Germany, 1942. The He-177 killed an estimated 30 to 60 of its own aircraft through in-flight engine fires, before accounting for a single enemy aircraft destroyed. Luftwaffe crews called the Luftwaffenfeurzeug, the Air Force's lighter, because the coupled engine arrangement generated heat that routinely ignited the nacelles. Pilots hated it because fire in flight is not a condition that skill or discipline can address. It is a countdown. Crews who detected smoke had seconds to determine whether they were looking at an engine problem or the beginning of a structural fire that would destroy the aircraft. Many did not have enough time to determine which it was before the answer became irrelevant. 13. Messerschmitt Me 210 Germany, 1941. The Me 210 killed at least 16 pilots and crews in documented fatal accidents during its development and initial operational phase losses so severe that Luftwaffe units formally refused to accept the aircraft, and the program was raised in the German Reichstag as evidence of institutional failure. Pilots hated it because its instability was not a minor handling characteristic. It was an aircraft that could depart controlled flight without warning during routine maneuvers. The snap rolls and unrecoverable spins it produced were not the result of pilot error. They were the predictable behavior of an aircraft whose center of gravity and stability margins had been fundamentally miscalculated at the design stage. 14. Focke-Wulf FW-187, Germany, 1937. The FW-187 killed no pilots through its own failures, It was a capable and well-regarded design. It belongs in this account for a different reason. When comparative testing demonstrated that the FW-187 outperformed the BF-110 in speed and maneuverability, the RLM chose the BF-110 regardless, on procurement grounds. The pilots who subsequently flew the inferior aircraft into combat against opponents it could not match had no knowledge of the alternative that testing had already proven to exist. The hatred here belongs not to the aircraft, but to the decision, and to the distance between the people who made it and the people who died as a result. 15. Douglas TBD Devastator, United States, 1937. The Devastator killed 35 of 41 crews in a single operational day at the Battle of Midway on June 4, 1942, an 85% loss rate that remains one of the most concentrated single-day losses of any aircraft type in American military aviation history. Torpedo Squadron 8 from USS Hornet lost all 15 aircraft with one survivor. Pilots hated the Devastator with a specific and documented grievance. Its obsolescence had been formally identified before Midway. Its vulnerability during the mandatory slow, low torpedo approach was not a tactical surprise. It was a known and recorded limitation. The crews were sent in the aircraft regardless, and the outcome was exactly what the pre-war assessments had projected. 16. Nakajima B-5N Kate, Japan, 1937. The B-5N Kate killed Japanese crews through institutional inertia more than mechanical failure. Loss rates in torpedo attack profiles against defended American targets consistently exceeded 50% per mission in documented 1942 to 1943 engagements. Yet crews continued flying offensive torpedo operations in an aircraft that had been outpaced by American defensive fighters and anti-aircraft systems. Japanese naval aviators who survived multiple Kate missions understood with increasing clarity that each sortie represented a statistical diminishment of the probability they would reach the next one. The aircraft itself was not poorly designed. It had been excellent in 1937. What killed its crews was the gap between what it had been and what it was still being asked to do. 17. Aviation IL-2 Sturmovik, Soviet Union, 1941. The single-seat IL-2 killed Soviet pilots at a rate that prompted Stalin's personal written intervention. With the rear gunner position deleted for production expediency, German fighters attacked from behind without opposition, and IL-2 loss rates during 1941 to 1942 were among the highest of any frontline Soviet type. Total IL-2 losses across the war are estimated at over 10,000 aircraft. Pilots hated the single-seat variant because they could hear the German fighters they could not see and could not engage. The rear quarter was an open vulnerability that every Luftwaffe pilot knew to exploit. The restoration of the rear gunner in 1942 came after the cost of its removal had been fully and irreversibly paid. 18. Lavochkin Gorbanov Gudkov Lag 3, Soviet Union, 1941. Soviet pilots named the Lag 3 the Lakarovny Garantirovny Grob, the lacquered guaranteed coffin, and the name was operationally accurate. Of approximately 6,528 produced, losses in the first 2 years of Eastern Front operations were catastrophic relative to the aircraft's combat effectiveness. The pilots hated it because it was heavy, underpowered, and slow to respond, qualities that in the Eastern Front environment translated directly into an inability to disengage from a fight that was going wrong. A pilot who recognized he was losing an engagement in a Lag 3 frequently lacked the performance margin to exit it. The coffin the pilots named it after was not a metaphor. It was a statistical projection they could calculate themselves. 19. Polikarpov PO-2, Soviet Union, 1928. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment flew over 23,000 combat sorties in the PO-2 and lost 30 pilots killed in action across the war. Figures that reflect extraordinary discipline given the aircraft's total absence of protection. Flying open cockpit biplanes at night without parachutes in early operations, without radios, and without defensive armament. Crews operated in conditions of absolute physical exposure. Pilots did not hate the PO-2. They flew it with documented professionalism and courage. What they faced was not a machine that betrayed them, but a situation in which their survival depended entirely on their own skill. because the aircraft they were given offered them nothing else. 20. Mitsubishi Ki-67 Hiryu, Japan, 1944. The Ki-67 was a genuinely capable aircraft, fast, maneuverable, and well-regarded by the crews who flew it in conventional operations. It killed its own pilots not through mechanical failure, but through reassignment. In 1945, Ki-67 crews trained for conventional bombing were transferred to TACO Special Attack Operations, targeting Allied naval forces during the Okinawa Campaign. Japanese records document Ki-67 TACO missions flown as deliberate one-way sorties. Pilots who had trained to return did not. The aircraft's quality was irrelevant to missions designed to terminate at the target. What its crews hated, where hatred is even an applicable term, was not the machine but the order. 21. Kyushu J-7W Shinden, Japan, 1945. The Shinden's two prototypes experienced propeller shaft vibration severe enough to preclude extended flight during testing, and Japan's stated production target of 1,000 aircraft per month existed entirely in planning documents disconnected from any industrial reality. No pilots were killed in the Shinden directly. What the program represents is an institutional refusal to acknowledge the gap between what was being designed and what was survivable and producible in mid-1945 Japan. Test pilots who flew the prototypes documented an aircraft that was genuinely promising but nowhere near ready, and a program built around delivery timelines that had no foundation in the conditions under which Japanese industry was actually operating. 22. Heinkel He-162 Volksjäger, Germany, 1945. The He-162 killed at least 13 of its own pilots in documented accidents during its brief operational period, through airframe structural failures, including the fatal public demonstration crash on December 10, 1944, caused by wood bonding failure in the leading edge, and through handling characteristics at jet speeds that minimally trained pilots could not manage. Pilots hated it because the program's solution to their inadequate training was not better training. It was a proposal to use Hitler Youth members instead. The He-162 was not designed to keep its pilots alive through anything as reliable as engineering. It was designed to be built quickly and flown by whoever was available, and the loss record reflects exactly that priority. 23. Bachemba 349 Natter, Germany, 1945. The Natter killed its only manned vertical launch test pilot, Lothar Sieber, on March 1, 1945, when the canopy separated shortly after launch, almost certainly incapacitating him immediately. The aircraft climbed inverted and impacted the ground. Sieber left no documented account of what he experienced in those final seconds because there was no surviving pilot to provide one. The Natter's engineers had formally acknowledged that the bailout provision at operational speeds was theoretically possible, but practically unlikely to be survivable. Sieber was the only man who flew it vertically under power. He was also the only man who needed to survive it to validate the concept, and he did not. 24. Messerschmitt Me 163 Komet, Germany, 1944. The Me-163 killed its pilots through chemistry as reliably as through aerodynamics. Its Walter HWK-509 rocket engine ran on T-Stoff and C-Stoff, hypergolic propellants that ignited spontaneously on contact with each other or with organic material, including human tissue. Fuel leaks during landing killed pilots who had survived the 596 miles per hour flight. The aircraft landed dead stick every single time, as a glider after fuel exhaustion, with Allied fighters waiting at low altitude during the approach. The pilots hated the Me-163 because every phase of its operation carried a distinct and separate method by which it could kill them: the fuel on the ground, the fuel in flight, the speed during engagement, and the silence of the unpowered approach home. 25. Fieseler Fi-103 R. Reichenberg, Germany, 1944. The Reichenberg was a piloted V-1 flying bomb in which the theoretical bailout provision existed on paper and not in physics. At operational speeds, exiting the aircraft and surviving was documented by test pilots, including Hannah Reich, as practically impossible. Reich flew test versions and survived, but test versions were not flown at the terminal speeds of an operational attack profile. the pilots who volunteered. And they were volunteers, though the social and institutional context of late-war Germany shaped what volunteering meant. Understood the mathematics. No Reichenberg was used operationally. The aircraft itself never killed anyone beyond the test program. What it documents is a willingness, at the institutional level, to design an aircraft in which pilot survival was an afterthought appended to a weapons delivery system. 26. Yokosuka MXY-7 Oka, Japan, 1945. The Oka killed every pilot who flew it operationally because it was designed with that outcome as its function. Carried to release altitude beneath a G-4M bomber that was itself extremely vulnerable to American combat air patrols, the Oka was released when the carrier aircraft could no longer protect it, frequently beyond effective range of the target. American fighters destroyed numerous G-4M/Oka combinations before the Oka could be released at all, killing Oka pilots still locked in the unpowered weapon beneath the bomber. The pilots who flew the Oka left written records, letters and final statements preserved in Japanese archives that document with clarity what it meant to board an aircraft from which return had been removed as a design requirement. 27. Convair XF-92A, United States, 1948. The XF-92A was an experimental delta-wing aircraft whose low-speed handling characteristics and aerodynamic unpredictability at the limits of the configuration's understood behavior made it a genuinely hazardous evaluation subject. No pilots were killed in the XF-92A program, but test pilots including Chuck Yeager documented its behavioral limits with the directness of men who had encountered them personally. The aircraft's significance is in what it cost to learn. The aerodynamic data purchased through flights that placed pilots inside a configuration whose behavior at the edges of the envelope was not fully predictable before they flew there. 28. Northrop XB-35, YB-49, United States, 1946. The YB-49 killed Captain Glenn Edwards and 4 crew members on June 5, 1948, when the flying wing broke apart in flight. A structural failure attributed to the directional instability inherent in the tailless configuration and the flight control technology's inability to compensate for it. Edwards Air Force Base carries his name today. Pilots who flew the YB-49 documented its instability with consistent concern, an aircraft that required constant correction and that, at certain conditions, exceeded what the flight control systems of the era could manage. The gap between Northrop's aerodynamic vision and the technology available to make it survivable was measured, in the end, in 5 lives. 29. Douglas X-3 Stiletto, United States, 1952. The X-3 Stiletto was designed to investigate sustained supersonic flight, but lacked the engine thrust to achieve it. A fundamental mismatch between design intent and propulsion capability that emerged during the flight test program. It contributed directly to the understanding of inertia coupling, a phenomenon in which rolling maneuvers at high speed and altitude could generate pitch and yaw forces that overwhelmed pilot control. Test pilot Joseph Walker experienced severe inertia coupling during an X-3 flight in 1954, an incident that was documented and subsequently informed the design of future high-performance aircraft. The X-3 killed no pilots directly, but it identified a mechanism that had already killed others and would have killed more without the data it provided. 30. Lockheed F-104 Starfighter, United States, 1958. The F-104 Starfighter earned the name Witwenmacher, the Widowmaker, from the pilots of the German Luftwaffe, which operated it under NATO commitment from 1961 onward. Germany lost 292 of its 916 F-104s to accidents, with 116 pilot fatalities, a loss rate of approximately 1 aircraft every 3 weeks across the operational period. The aircraft's thin, short wings provided minimal lift at low speed, and its downward-firing ejection seat, standard in early variants, was lethal at low altitude during the approach and landing phases where most accidents occurred. Pilots hated it with documented specificity. It was fast, it was demanding, and at low altitude and low speed it offered its pilot almost no survivable margin for error. If I made any mistake in this video, please let me know in the comment box. Your feedback helps improve future content and accuracy. Subscribe for more powerful aviation history videos every week.